Welkom bij het hiphophuis. Mijn naam is Andrew en vandaag ben ik jullie grieperige host. Dat is tegenwoordig mijn nieuwe ding. Maar ja, als je twee legenden hebt hier in Rotterdam die langskomen, dan doe je er alles aan om erbij te zijn. Omdat, ik vind het bijzonder dat we hier met z'n allen eigenlijk een sessie kunnen doen waarin we gebruik kunnen maken van de kennis van de twee heren die hier naast mij op het podium zitten. En misschien moet ik nog even een paar dingen zeggen in het Nederlands, zodat we daarna in het Engels kunnen overgaan. En dat is dat we hebben natuurlijk zondag ook in het Wereldmuseum hebben we naar Great Tate kunnen luisteren. We hebben een discussie gehad op copy-paste, we hebben het gehad over cultural appropriation. En we hebben dat met winnen gedaan met het nieuwe vliegen. En dan denk je, ja, wat gaan we dan vandaag doen? Nou, elementen uit die discussie die komen terug. Want alles is een beetje interwoven. Maar vandaag gaan we proberen toch een soort expert sessie te doen. Jullie zijn toch allemaal op je eigen manier, zijn jullie leiders of op weg leiders te zijn in jullie gebied. En we zouden het leuk vinden als we wat kennis van deze heren over kunnen dragen door middel van de vragen die jullie stellen naar aanleiding van de ervaringen die zij delen. En dan zal natuurlijk voorbij komen de omgevingen waarin we opereren, de white spaces om het zo maar te noemen, maar vooral ook hun persoonlijke ervaringen. En hoe blijf je overeind? Hoe hou je je stamina? Hoe word je niet gek? Allemaal dingen die we wel eens met elkaar bespreken, die via de app gaan, die op verjaardagen worden besproken. En die kunnen we nu vragen aan deze twee heren van de overkant van de klas. Want ja, in Amerika gebeuren vaak dingen toch veel eerder dan hier. Dus maken we daar gebruik van. Nou, I was given a short introduction in Dutch. Maar ja, laten we dan iets zeggen. Bij mij zit aan deze kant Greg Tate. Hij is schrijver, muzikant, culturele provocateur wordt er wel eens gezegd. Born and raised in Dayton, Ohio. And when he was 13 years old, his family moved to Washington, D.C. And he credits Amiri Baraka's black music, which he first read when he was 14, with stimulating his interest in collecting and writing about music. He taught himself how to play a guitar as a teenager and eventually studied at Howard University. I think that's a historically black college, isn't that?
Very historic.
That's, I knew that. I was just very black. Studied journalism and film. He moved to New York City, developed a friendship with countless musicians, started musical collaborations, co-founded the Black Rock Coalition with some very important African American musicians, worked and published for the New York Times, Washington Post, Downbeat, Essence, Jazz Times, Rolling Stones, Vibe, Source. Basically, you could call him one of the godfathers of hip-hop journalism. Let's give him a round of applause. I could go on and on for like 2 minutes, but then we'll, you know, there's so much that has been done. I want to get to the conversation as well. The other man here is somebody I met as a youngin' when I was still living in Amsterdam. And one of those nights that you're out having a beer and smoking your hashish and you think you bump into somebody from the States, you think you know shit, and then you get sent back home. You get schooled and your ears are washed at a distance. Then you pick yourself up and you go back to the drawing board, and then those are the moments when you realize that you're literally standing on the shoulders of giants. I am older now, still young, but at that time when I ran into Edson and the guys at Fat Beats, I now, yesterday, overlooking the little research I was doing for this interview, I realized that Rich Medina played a very important role in my development as a radio DJ and as a lover of hip-hop by connecting me to New York before I knew him. Because I remember going to New York with DJ Mr. Wiggs and Guillaume Schmidt, who owns Pata, with Edson. And there was this place where we went to. I'll tell you a short story. I was in there, and they had to sneak me in because I was too young to get into that place. And obviously I got horribly drunk, and I started acting up. And Wiggs and G were like, behave, you don't know where we are. That place turned out to be the apartment. And the apartment is a place where Rich Medina came from New Jersey, where after going to school, to an Ivy League school, mind you, an excellent athlete, and I think he worked at a place called Abbott Laboratory, some medical instruments, devices developer. I think it was like a near six-figure salary. He left to go and just carry crates from place to place, and then came from New Jersey to New York, where he, created a space for himself between all the musical vanguard at that place apartment. That was one of his residencies, and I could go on and on where he's been DJing. He's been playing music all around the world. There's another thing that he's done. He started something called Jump and Funk, which deals with Afrobeat and Fela. It's another place where I really love Rich for, because coming from Uganda, again having to go to the stateside to actually be given something that comes from your home it's a metaphor of how both Rich and Greg are really dedicated to the culture, have studied the culture. Greg Tate gave a lecture on Sunday where he really showed us all that we all appropriate in black culture, and that we wouldn't have black music today if we didn't have these hundreds of artists who all learned and took from the generations before them. So just to give you a broad perspective of who you're dealing with, maybe a round of applause for Rich as well. And as I said in Dutch, what we're going to try and do is have a conversation. I'll have a short conversation, maybe 20 minutes with them first, about how did they get to do what they're doing, what were the obstacles, what did they learn, and again, how does those spaces operate? How do they operate in the spaces, and what can we learn from those lessons? But before we do that, maybe we could do just a quick, everybody says who they are and what they do, so that they have an idea who we are dealing with on this side. Is that okay? So, I'll start with you, gentlemen. Yeah, you.
My name is Taro van der Meer, and I'm an organizer of breaking events together with Mario. We have our office here at the Hip Hop House, and that's what we do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next.
My name is Mario. I'm an organizer together with Tyrone. We do breaking events. I do also beat events, beat battles, beat challenge. I'm also a host MC for B-Boy Events International. We do the Dutch B-Boy Championships, and I'm living my life.
Thank you. That's okay. That's Rita.
Hello. My name is Rita Widrago, and I work as a research program and community collaboration officer at the Research Center for Material Culture.
Hi, I'm Wayne, and
Lord Wayne Modest.
I work at a research institute about culture in the World Museum, and I also lecture at the Free University.
And without you, we wouldn't have had these gentlemen here. We could say that, yeah. Modest as you are. Behind you.
Yes, I'm Leo. I lead the main program at the Hip Hop House, where we are a center focused on education and experiencing hip hop culture. I also have a foundation, basically started the first professional league of the dance battle scene in 2 weeks. We're all invited. That's why I'm an organizer and dancer in the scene.
Thank you. Let's continue. Yeah. You can go.
Hi, I'm Katya. I'm a dancer and dance teacher from Russia, and I moved to Lebanon a few months ago.
Welcome. Next to you.
Hi, my name is Ravi. I'm from Toronto. I work in African diaspora policy and also artist. I'm an illustrator and a pop dancer.
Welcome as well.
Hi, I'm Comfy. I work here at the Hip Hop House. I'm a host and a performing artist.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Fen. I'm working here at the Hip Hop House for marketing communication.
Okay, let's go. Mr. Cutlass.
I'm Geraldo. I'm also BK. Known as DJ Cutlass.
Thank you. Let's go ahead. Next to you.
I'm Neda Sue. I'm a dancer, choreographer, and a theater maker, and I have an own association that is focused on street and club culture.
Thank you.
My name is Tamara. I'm one of the teachers at Hip Hop House, and I'm a dancer.
Malik Mahmoud, independent researcher, writer, and designer, and bringer of the funk.
And bringer of change as well.
Hi, I'm Shiri. I'm a choreographer. I grew up here in Hip Hop House. I found it when I was 16 years old, and then I went on to study dance, and I'm also a teacher here.
My name is Tasha. I'm an artist, but I also have a company together with my partner Samantha, Sam uit den Boogaard, and we have the hip hop House of Knowledge. That's what it's called, and we are actually based in a hip hop house as well. We guide young, talented musicians, dancers, creatives to the working field. We try to connect them and try to help them establish themselves and give them a stage to present themselves on.
My name is Grace, and I work as a brand manager in the World Museum.
Thank you, Grace. Ras?
Ras King, artist, producer, teacher, student of life.
Hi, my name is Johanna. I'm new to the Netherlands, and I'm working at the Research Center for Material Culture as well.
Okay.
Ashley, I'm a photographer, videographer, and musician, and I explore female identity and black identity in the Netherlands.
Great work.
My name is Johan. I'm studying to be a French teacher. I'm a DJ, and trying to give my parts to the culture by doing variety things.
Johan, that's a great line. Hello, I'm Johan. I'm studying to be a French teacher and I'm a DJ.
I'm Lina. I'm also an intern for communications and events at the Research Center for Material Culture.
Next to you.
I'm Matteo. I'm also an intern from Vanity for communication and marketing in Parijs.
Behind complex.
Yes, my name is Ade Chon, aka Complex, and I'm an artist. I've been busy as a hip hop MC, spoken word artist, and I've also been privileged to organize events, especially Live in the Low, which was founded in '98, and it has been a platform for a lot of young artists in town. So we try to participate actively in the scene, support artists.
You built a lot with that, believe me, that's true.
Hi, my name is Paris. I like to call myself an all-around creative because I do a lot of stuff. I like to make music, but also photography, etc. I'm also an intern. I'm very committed to the hip hop house community.
Okay. Is there somebody behind you one? Yeah? Oh no, that's Aruna. Okay, Aruna, don't you want to say something? Yeah?
Yeah, two ladies here.
Hi, I'm Chelsea. I'm an artist developer over at Hiphop Records. Well, I understand what I should say that. So I should name myself. I'm an artist developer over at Hiphop Records, which is a lo-fi beats label.
Okay, thank you. We're nearly there. Oh, sorry.
Hi, I'm Sophia. I'm brand activation manager at Hiphop Music. I have my own nonprofit organization for projects for children in youth care, and I'm furniture at Hip
Furniture. Rich was like, wow, that's deep. We've got such a brilliant group of people. Have I missed anybody in the back now? No. Okay, so let's, yeah?
When you need or
No,
my name is Marika, and I work for the City of Rotterdam for the Department of Culture, and I used to work in
welcome.
Thank you.
And you, sir?
I'm Jermaine. I work with Tasha and Sam as well for the House of Knowledge upstairs, and I'm responsible for the marketing and communication. I study musicology as well in Amsterdam, and I make music. I'm a hip-hop MC, and I play the piano as well.
Thank you. Yeah?
My name is Kim. I'm a colleague of Anna Rinke. I also work at the local government, and in the local government we're trying to find ways to support your communities in arts and culture.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Victor. I'm a local DJ / freelancer.
Okay.
My name is Chris. I'm a teacher here at Hip Hop House, B-boy.
My name is Stephanie. I'm an arts and culture curator
identify the moments, movements, and people, and create safe spaces to get a nice shape.
Amen. Let's give her a round of applause. You better be on the lookout, gentlemen. She's coming.
Hi, my name is Roberto. I organize projects where I bring creators together where they can put their potential in one project.
Okay. Behind you.
Hi, my name is Shiera. I work as a curator at Kunsthal.
Okay. That's also art. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Sam. I'm co-owner of House of Knowledge, a host as well, and
Okay. Now, so we have an idea of who's in the room. It's quite impressive, isn't it? Yes. Yeah. I'm so happy that Aruna brought us together. The two questions are, how do we build a durable practice in hip-hop culture and stay sane? How do we keep stamina in that process? But as I said, I would like to go back to how do you even get into the game? And ask the gentleman, why did you get into this in the first place? And
well, I went to, as the brother said, Howard University in the 70s. And Howard University is in Washington, D.C., which we call Chocolate City. And it was so chocolate that George Clinton and Parliament Funkadelic dedicated the entire album to the city. And I consider the D.C. at that time.
oh, the mic, maybe you should turn the mic on and see if it's on.
Oh, is it? Yeah, it's on. It's on.
Okay.
That's just low.
It's just low.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah, DC at that time I considered like a black cultural utopia, in the sense that across every discipline and in terms of the political life, you know, radical political life of the city, it was on and popping, you know, and all the music that was happening came through the city like every week. You know, you could go to a club and there'd be these stacked bills of artists. So all the artists that you know from that era were coming through on a regular basis, and they were coming through together. You know, so you know you might have Gil Scott Heron and Earth, Wind and Fire, and Rufus and Shaka Khan and Bobby Womack, you know, on the same bill. You know, the next week it would be, you know, Last Poets and Mandrill and, you know, the Delphonics and Betty Davis. So there was just a lot to absorb, just culturally. But then when I got to Howard, like every department was just filled with just brilliance and genius, you know. And in particular, I spent a lot of time in the fine arts department and in communications, which encompassed film. And so I got to study there under the great Ethiopian director, thinker, activist, Haile Gerima. If you don't know Haile, you definitely need to check out his work. He's got about 10, 12 different films he's made independently. You know, he was at Howard for probably about 40 years. He just retired. You know, just major figure, major thinker. You know, really in terms of my ability to do kind of a critical analysis of media. You know, a lot of it comes from studying with him. And, you know, so I was there studying journalism and film, but I thought I was going to be a filmmaker. But I started doing journalism at the school, writing for the school paper called The Hilltop. And I came into serious musicology, I would say, around jazz, you know, and there were a lot of really just profound thinkers about the culture, about jazz in the city as well. So I had a whole kind of coterie of mentors at the time, you know, but you know, I started collecting vinyl, you know, probably about like 15, 16. And so by the time I moved to New York in the 80s, you know, I think I brought about maybe about 5,000 pieces of vinyl.
Wow.
You know, which, you know, but I was also doing radio at the time too. you know. But vinyl was also my education in terms of the history of just black music, you know. So I went through all the eras, you know. Like I spent my time with you know, with the music of Jelly Roll Morton and Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington, and just kept moving through, you know. And you know, one of the things that you learn from jazz is that succession of styles and vocabulary, you know, that goes you know, through each era. You know, each era produces a figure that the next generation learns from, and so forth. You know, and you also learn about the collaborative nature of the thing, which is very important. You know, the way musicians of each era, the most talented ones, you know, kind of bond together, and they're able to leave a kind of indelible mark, a signature on that generation in terms of sound, in terms of statement, in terms of communication, you know, in terms of strengthening the culture's presence, you know, within the world, you know. And you become very aware of the fact that these musicians operated on a global level, you know what I mean, that out of something that was really created within the core of the black community, you know, they created this art form that I can go anywhere in the world and hear, you know. I mean, you know, we are everywhere, you know, in terms of the cultural presence, you know. And we talked about but you know, I started writing for the paper that would be my mainstay, the Village Voice, while I was still living in D.C. Had a great writer.
One second.
Yeah.
I think I need to turn off my mic. Can you hear me like this? Is that okay?
Yeah.
No? Because it's interrupting. So either turn my mic down, this one, so that we can hear him better. It's just, yeah?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, you can. Yeah.
Switch back.
Yeah, maybe you take this mic.
Oh, wait, just turn it off.
I will turn it off, yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
That one is not really.
It's not working.
That one's really working. We'll try and use Rich, and then we share a mic. This is because otherwise we'll.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, you got the whole Howard University story, studying history of jazz, blah, blah, blah. And then, so there's a paper in New York called The Village Voice, right? And it was really like a major journalistic enterprise that really developed a lot of writers, really was on the cutting edge of covering culture and politics in the city, you know, was very connected to the activism that was going on in black community, gay community, feminism, and was really one of the first places to take hip hop seriously, you know, in terms of journalistic coverage, you know. So, you know, I started there at the same time as the writer Nelson George and another writer named Michael Cooper, who went on to write a bunch of movies, including New Jack City. And I was, you know, I wrote for that paper for about, you know, it was about 22, 23 years, you know what I mean? So that was like my foundation in terms of work, you know. And then I wrote for all the other papers, magazines, you know. And in terms of just how I got into the game professionally, like a friend of mine who worked at the paper, Tulani Davis, told me to send some work to the music editor, a cat named Robert Christgau. And at the time, he was definitely looking to expand the pool of writers that he had, to definitely include more black writers in particular, because he saw the impact that, you know, early on, he was one of those people that saw the impact that hip hop was having in a transformational way, you know, in culture and society. And he realized, like, I need some writers who are more embedded in these communities, you know, to write about this. So a whole stream of us came through eventually, you know, kind of, and wrote for the paper. People, you know, we have names now, Dream Hampton, Harry Allen.
Harry Allen is a legend as well.
Yeah. You know, and so there was a whole community of just kind of black folks writing for the paper about the late 80s, early 90s. Yeah.
So maybe Rich, the same thing, like, why did you get it? Because like, you're at an Ivy League college, you graduated I think at 25, you had this company, and then all of a sudden?
Well, outwardly, it looks like all of a sudden, but like Greg, I'm a 70s kid from the United States, first generation in my family post-civil rights era. I was born in 1969. They were lynching men that looked like me in my neighborhood in New Jersey the month I was born. So, coming from this place, whether it's your parents or elders or somebody in your neighborhood, the whole disposition is, you better do something you can be fucking proud of. Because a lot of motherfuckers just got finished dying so that you can walk in the front door of this building. Little shit. We want to shit on the same toilet as white people. We want to walk in the front door and we want to vote. It's ill how such a little tiny box of wishes, right? And all that death, all that struggle, because the Constitution wasn't written with us in mind. We were considered 3/5 of a human being at the time. America is the youngest colonizer. The United States is like an 18-year-old muscle-bound bully in a room full of 60-year-old dudes that used to be the bully. That's who America is. That's why some of the energy that we carry with regard to hip-hop in particular, it's a space where you can exemplify individuality, prowess, dedication, discipline, right? Every one of us in here, you teach b-boy. You've done 1 million fucked up head spins before you hit the first one, right? So your success is built on top of your failures. You fail, nobody's watching, so that you can shine when the lights are on you. Not everybody's gonna be a politician or a businessman or an athlete, you know? And I think you can agree, when we were growing up, you were a mama's boy, a hustler, an athlete, or doing something creative. Or you were chasing girls. And if you were good at any of those other things, sometimes the girls would chase you. So it wasn't that I went to school and did these things and all of a sudden I'm in hip hop. From 9 years old, I've been watching the dudes in my neighborhood who were the illest dancers, the illest graffiti artists, the illest MCs. My sister is 18 years older than me. Her first husband was a local DJ. They lived with me and my mom until I was 10. I watched this man prepare for gigs, packing his 7-inch records in a pleather suitcase and you know, like the paper towel rolls. I remember vividly, I'm like taking the paper towel rolls and crushing them and pushing them down in the belly of the 45, you know, it's 45 the big hole, so that the records wouldn't move. And I was like, man, you know, necessity is the mother of invention, you know? They didn't have this tool, this ill fancy tool to carry these things and keep them safe. He figured it out. And hip hop is about fucking figuring it out. You can't do a windmill, you wanna move your body like that? Figure it out. You wanna rhyme? Get a fucking notebook and get your shit together. Or go fuck yourself. That's how the world works, right? It's harsh. Sounds harsh coming out of my mouth, right? That's what the world is saying to us. Yeah, fuck you, figure it out. That's what you are? Really? Show me.
So the hip hop was in you.
Hip hop is
long
that.
before, but then both of you chose to go to school. Because as you explained very correctly, a lot of people died for you to be able to go to school.
100%.
So you went to school.
Yes. I went to Cornell University.
I think there's 58 Nobel laureates coming from that school.
Yes.
What did you learn there that you still carry with you today?
In progressive Ithaca.
Progressive.
At Cornell University, the biggest thing I learned is the way white people think about money.
Uh-huh.
And the way white people think about money is they don't think about money. They don't have to. That's not to say that every white person is born into privilege, but that is to say that when the systems that the money comes from are designed to benefit your well-being, all you have to do is use the system. When you come from a place of not having, and you gotta navigate all these barriers and variables that are set up within this system that you wanna get into, and there's an ocean of firewalls that you gotta go under shit and over shit. It's like a military obstacle course, getting to this data. And then to get there and realize, oh shit, you know, my family's been playing from behind for generations on generations on generations, making something out of nothing, having to worry about bread all the time, have to worry about your safety all the time. What time of day is it? Can I safely walk down this street without being harassed just because of the amount of melanin in my skin? That's a really deep thing, because when you look at the notion of race over the years, you know, we're still playing from behind.
Yeah, but what did that, how did you deal with that? Because recently there have been articles published, the scientific data is out there that the gap in wealth between white and black Americans is so big and is so generationally, it goes back to slavery, that you could actually look at that and say we can never catch up, and then, like, you know, just be messed up.
They would say that Muggsy Bogues couldn't play basketball either at 5'3".
But you coming in that school, coming into that space, and seeing that difference, how did you feel when you encountered that, and what did you do with it to get where you are today?
In high school, I could burp on a paper and get an A. I don't know why. I ain't that fucking smart. Whatever reason, I retain information well. When I got to Cornell, I had to learn how to study. It's two different fucking things. There's a difference between theory and application. So what I learned is, fuck you, get it done, or we're gonna put your ass out of here. So, ain't nobody gonna come, ain't no cavalry coming, ain't nobody gonna save you. You wanna play at this level, get your shit together. Immediately. No procrastination. You wanna wait until tomorrow? Great, fuck you. 15 guys are gonna jump in that slot while you're over there dicking around.
So that's what you learned?
You learn to get to it.
Greg, just a little bit on the side note, I was looking up Howard University. And this week, our great friend, Kanye West, was at Howard University. And I just want to slip this in, because this has a bit to do with success, and what is success, and how do you maintain your success and keep your stamina. You know, people could safely say that he's single-handedly changing the position of black people in fashion. Others will say that's not true. But let's not get into the discussion. He's an influential person, and he was at Howard University at that historical black college. And he did his Sunday service, and he said, if they're throwing slave nets again, how about we all don't stand in the same place? Later he said, I was in debt. I was in the mental hospital. I was cancelled, but the power belongs to God. As we stand here right in the yard of Howard University, does this look like cancelled to you? Greg Carr, the associate professor at Howard's Department of Afro-American Studies, said, we need to send West to the school's library to pick up a copy of The Miseducation of the Negro. Coming from that school, being here today in the context of this discussion, what are your thoughts on such a performance, and maybe the state?
I think everybody is but you know, Kanye is the product of of some super educated parents, I mean, who put him in a position to be intellectually ahead of the place that most people who become rappers. All right, you know, I mean, like one of the most fascinating things about Kanye to me is the fact that he spent his elementary education took place in China.
Really?
Yeah, because his mother was there teaching English as a second language. So, you know, there's like a period of 3 or 4 years where he was in elementary school with like Chinese students, you know, speaking Chinese.
Opening his mind to a total
Yeah,
different dimension.
yeah, you know. So, you know, and the thing about, you know, hip hop as if we want to look at it as a business, you know, in the way that it kind of democratized a certain access to what do we call it? Wealth management and growing, you know, is that it created this platform, you know, for him to exist. You know what I mean? People like Russell Simmons, you know, found out when he went into the fashion business that it's like the aura of black culture, you know, is far more lucrative than the actual material of black culture, you know, in the sense that, you know, Russell said, you know, he made more money in 1 year when he started his little fat farm store down in Seoul than he made in 10 years in the music business, because the music business is basically set up to rob you, you know, of whatever wealth you produce for them. You know what I mean? So in terms of like, so even in, you know, when you talk about working from behind, you know, in the music business, everybody who gets signed to a deal is automatically, you're working from behind for the rest of your life. You know, and somebody else owns, you know, your property, your intellectual, cultural property, you know. But you know, I mean, I actually, I appreciate him as a provocateur, no matter how ignorant. I mean, most of his.
I can sort of
his
like even
conclusions
understand what he's trying to say, but he's getting cancelled, and he's at that historic place. And is that stamina? Is that somebody who has a problem, or is this durable practice in hip hop culture? How do you see that? Maybe Rich.
Well, I mean, I think you always. I mean, the thing about, you know, as Rich said, you know, because you're in a world that don't give a fuck, you know, and you're also aware, as particularly, you know, people who are musical artists in America are aware that your obsolescence is kind of built into your success.
Yeah.
You know, you're only supposed to survive, you know, for maybe like 3 or 4 years. You know, for most artists, I mean, that's the lifespan of a lot of young, you know, artists that come into the thing. So, you know, he's figured out ways to reinvent himself when, you know, he has a certain irrelevance in terms of the cultural practice, you know, that he began with. You know,
How do you see that?
You know, Kanye West is a very interesting animal. Partially because of what Greg said about his education and his family's presence in education and their affluence in his childhood. It put him in the very posture that I was describing earlier as a black kid.
Yeah.
It was a black family existing in that space. And if anything, I have to believe that Kanye dumbed down his capacity into making beats and writing rhymes and producing music for other people. Because with a mind as expansive as his is, and there's no denying the expanse of his brain, but sometimes us clever people start to out-clever ourselves. You start to actually believe that your shit don't stink.
Okay.
Some people would call it a God complex. How else could a black man in the 21st century say something as asinine as slavery was a choice? It's absolute ridiculous vocabulary.
And at the same time, deliver a new collection with Yeezy in a fashion industry with so much pressure and so much discipline. I don't get the two.
I can help you get it.
Yeah.
It's Adidas.
Yeah.
Adidas is around a long ass time before Kanye West came along, and they've been competing with Nike in the same town for the same sport which they started in, which was running. So Adidas got a lot of gusto with them.
But Adidas also was, kind of the first company to endorse a black athlete with Jesse Owens.
Jesse Owens.
Right, back
In Germany.
In Germany.
In Nazi Germany.
Right. Yeah, they wouldn't found him right
The
after
same
the
time
race.
the Fuhrer was like, they got
So,
big
yo.
thigh muscles and strong butts and they do all this stuff. That,
Okay, gentlemen. So, no, but I want to hear one thing, because I used the Kanye example to try and get to the point. Did you ever have a moment in your life where you thought your shit didn't stink, or that you actually were heading some way and your family or your friends had to pull you back, or, just a fuck up that you would like to share with us?
fucked up a lot, man. I
Because
mean,
then they can ask questions about how,
your successes are built on top of your failures. Messing things up, getting ahead of yourself. Again, it's a case of, we all think we clever. Everybody in here thinks they're fucking clever as hell. So you get a little too clever for yourself. And you end up tripping over yourself, tripping over your ego, putting your ego in front of the purpose, putting your ego in front of the people who are helping you get where you're going. And, the best thing that any of us can do is get really personal with the idea of being able to apologize. To be able to say, you know what, man? I went about that shit completely wrong. My bad. That saved me from a mountain of ass whoopings in the street. That saved me from losing substantial opportunities or stepping stones in my career that are gonna enable me in another way than I was enabled the year prior or the months prior. So yeah, I mean, blunders, Jesus.
Great.
Well, the paper I wrote for had a very volatile letter section, So, and people would get so upset around things that people were writing in the paper that, the floor got regularly cleared because of bomb threats.
Seriously?
Oh yeah. And but I can remember, anything you wrote, you were gonna get pushback. I mean, we were kind of doing. It was kind of like the access that the audience had to the writers was comparable to what the internet allows in terms of people's feet, kind of back and forth and kind of combative dialogue with one another. So I remember I did a piece on Michael Jackson's Bad, but it was kind of an early piece just talking about Michael and bleaching and plastic surgery and all of that, the whitening of, and the piece was called I'm White. That was like the cover headline, and I just remember, Mike has a, he has stands, like, he had stands before there was a term, stand, you know what I mean? Before Stan made anything, and so, there were people who threatened, all kinds of bodily harm, and, one cat, he actually wrote a Yoruba death curse. I mean, he was
like some
yeah.
Voodoo from West
Oh, well,
Africa.
no, he was invoking the Rishas to just come handle me.
So Binti is.
Because of the way I went after Mike, you know what I mean? So, and so I think, like, the thing about writing for a weekly paper and writing for a weekly paper like in the heart of New York is that, like, you get instant gratification every Tuesday or Wednesday when the paper comes out, you know what I mean? And one thing that we found out as black writers in the paper was that anytime there was a black cover, like, it sold 1,000 more copies than the paper normally sold, so we knew we had a certain kind of clout in there, So you get enough covers, like, yeah, you think you just motherfucking man, you know what I mean? But the audience, the readers will let you know, like, where you came up short, And I mean, I can talk about things on a more interpersonal level. It's just like, all the serious black feminist thinkers, in my life and at the paper that, called me up short for my own, like, abuses of,
let's give me some examples
of black male privilege.
Yeah,
You
so
know what I mean?
when was this?
Oh, this is my entire life. It goes on now. Yeah.
Well, let's break it down small, because I think that's where we get our lessons, because we have discussions about cancel culture. I don't know if you had that back in the day.
No,
that wasn't there, right?
No, you weren't canceling anybody with like a tweet.
No. So how did this work? On the one hand, you're the brother that's writing at the newspaper, but then the feminist came up to you and said, like, okay.
I mean, I think that, as men, we operate at a serious deficit of knowledge, about what it is to be a woman in the world, what it is to be like a woman dealing with all of these power structures, and firewalls that, that Rich spoke of, and sometimes it has to do with, it's like what you don't see, you know what I mean, in terms of just sexism in the music, you know what I mean, in the musical culture, you know what I mean.
Did your position on that evolve after having conversations with women?
Well, it also evolved because there were women writing about the music too,
Could I say it different? Were you happy you got called out?
Oh, I mean, of course.
Okay.
Because I got elevated in terms of my understanding of the world.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And the way that oppression works in the world. You know what I mean? So it's like I'm not necessarily like recalling like specific examples now, but I'm just saying like that was part of just the process of being like young man in my 20s that thought I understood racism, but I didn't really understand the magnitude of sexism.
Yeah. So that's something that, if we can conclude before we slowly go ahead towards the firewalls of the system and how you stay alive in the system and maybe help decolonize the system. I still want to figure out, because there's so much going on about financial illiteracy and not even financial, but just illiteracy in general when it comes to black culture. And we spoke Sunday about the power of your signature and how corporations will always have the lawyers on top, so it's hard to win that game. Is there anything that you learned from? Was it easier for you coming from a university because you had an educational background to take care of yourself, or is that just some illusion that we are projecting on ourselves because we're not succeeding? Rich.
I think once you have a degree from an American university, I think you're dealing with dual consciousness in its highest extreme, because you recognize your ethnicity and where you come from and what that means within these systems, but then to attain a degree from that system, you actually have now stepped into it. Now you're theoretically in bed with the devil. All of us are. I mean, we're talking about black culture and hip hop, two things that the government never gave a fuck about. And here we are in a government subsidized building with people who work for government organizations trying to figure out ways to what? Check boxes or engage? We have to ask that question. I'm not asking the question judgmentally. It's what the question is. Are we checking boxes? Checking boxes is easy. All it takes is a pen and a fucking box. Engaging means a completely flipped paradigm about how these things are dealt with going forward. The idea that people of color and the cultures that we generate and are created within our communities that penetrate the world end up being monetized. As they're being monetized, the next question is how many of us is seeing any of that monetization versus the organizations and brands and companies who are mass producing it and propelling it out into the world, right? So all the perfect people are dead and all the angels are in heaven. We have to fight this struggle, but it doesn't have to be a struggle if the institutions are willing to engage us.
How can we get that done? And if anybody has questions or wants to say something, please join in.
It's tough to answer.
Yeah, but
all I can say is tough to answer directly, immediately, because you have to look at all these checks and balances in a situation and really evaluate. Like even what you said about cancel culture.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to be a fucking activist until it's time to be an activist.
Right.
I got a lot of mans at home that got 30-something thousand follows on Instagram. Something happens in the media that rubs them the wrong way. All of a sudden they're an authority on what we should or should not be following. Oh, don't ride an Uber. You know Trump is invested in that. What? Okay, so if you're not gonna ride an Uber, you're gonna ride in anything at all? You're gonna walk everywhere? Because it's slave drivers at the top of all of this shit. So
then what to do?
What to do is pick your shots. We have to pick our shots. There needs to be more unified effort from the folks who are asking, and there needs to be more sincere engagement of the folks who are asking by the people who have the power to put us on these quote-unquote bigger platforms that we strive for. Is bigger necessarily where we need to be?
Better.
Hell no.
Does anybody have a question? Don't do this to me today, eh? Because at the end, everybody. But let me just ask them one more question.
Do you have an example? Because like when I was growing up, I would see the guys, they would have, they'd be hip hoppers and they would do something with a Nike account. And like then I started thinking like, okay, maybe even the guys like Rembrandt, they had to paint portraits for some rich families to do their free work. This dependency on capitalism. How did you deal with that? You have a child, you want to send that kid to a good school. What were the dilemmas you ran into during your working life?
And same for you, Greg, as a writer.
Those rappers that you were talking about that were doing something with Nike also had a record deal. So they're already doing something with some company, and perhaps the art that was mass produced and put out in the world was one of those things, one of those pieces of art that becomes the rock that drops in a still pond. It sends out a ripple, and people are now interested. This pond used to be still until that rock fell there. Oh, they're worthy of our money now because they made a wave, right? As an independent, our fundamental disposition is fuck that company. But at the same time, we want that shine, you want that accomplishment, you want that notch on your resume, you want that marker in the debris that you leave behind you. So it's this constant struggle with capitalism versus your art, your passion versus accelerating. I know a million guys in New York that are some of the most talented disc jockeys I've ever known in my life. When the Telecommunications Act happened in 1996, and one company got a monopoly on the FM airwaves, they went to become radio DJs because they thought it would make them bigger. But in actuality, all it did was give them a boss. They answer to a program director. They put the same 15 songs every 2 hours. They're fucking miserable. When they come to places where we frequent, they don't got no traffic with us. None of us. I say us, because it takes a special person to want to be in a place like this. All this talent, all this brain power in here, you guys could be anywhere, but you're in here trying to bear down on this thing that we're straddling. There's like a 1,000-foot drop between your legs, and you got to figure out which leg you're gonna lean on Monday, which leg you're gonna lean on Tuesday. Can you do a split without tearing the muscle? How you built? Because how you built is gonna tell where you sit. It's a bell curve. It's not math.
Yeah, when you ask the question about what's to be done, it's like, look, we got a 300-year history in America of people doing shit to transform the conditions of black folks. You know what I mean? Like, abolition, of slavery began with, in the ocean. Folks just jumping off in the middle. You know what I mean? Of the water. You know what I mean? And then, but, once you get into the antebellum, the slave, the chattel slave era. You know, there were like, at the end of the Civil War, there were 4 million people on plantations. There were 500,000 of us who were so-called free blacks, right? But what those folks were doing was combating by any means necessary, the slave system, you know? So you have people like a David Walker, wrote a book called David Walker's Appeal that advocated black people violently rising up and just killing any white person who benefited from the slave system. You got Nat Turner as an example. You know what I mean? You got...
And I know, and we got the Harper's Ferry raid, which is a very interesting story. But now back to this time, and your...
Well, yeah, no, but I'm saying, you know, this, like, there's a freedom movement lineage that you have to acknowledge. And you have to acknowledge that people have addressed all of these questions.
Before us.
Before us.
Okay, but
Marcus Garvey addressed
absolutely
the economic
no
question.
discussion.
Nation
no
of
discussion.
Islam addressed the economic question.
But
You know
first
what
of
I mean?
all, there's a lot of people that don't know that history, and we could get into that. Why they don't know the history, that's a whole other day of us getting together, especially also...
No, but I mean, I think the people here know, but I think it's important to just acknowledge that, you know, we're not starting from some zero-sum place in terms of how we responded to the contemporary condition. I mean, the thing is, I went to the National Museum of African American Culture History in D.C. And so, you know, it's 7 floors, and it takes you from the beginning of the slave trade with the Portuguese, and it even has like their exhibits of the money, you know, that was used to transact, you know, like slave auctions and that kind of thing. You know, they got bits of the slave ship in the basement, but you know, you start out back in the 15th century. By the end, you know, you're like the very end is like you're looking at postmodern black art in the gallery, you know what I mean? And they got Parliament's mothership up there and Chuck Berry's Cadillac and all that. You know, but the whole thing is they also are talking about Black Lives Matter on that last floor too, and Trayvon Martin and Eric Garner, and like, but because you start from that origin point, you realize like people who've had 500 years to figure out how to treat you right and they doing ain't got no intention of ever changing.
Okay, but
you know what I mean?
But
I'm saying that like you've got to look at the impact that black disruption has on changing our position with every generation. We expand the territory in which we operate culturally, socially, where we can live. You know what I mean? So you know, like my grandson is going to be fighting, you know, a different set of conditions. You know what I mean? Because my generation opened up a bit more of the floor. Kanye opened up a bit more of the floor for him to operate.
Sorry for interrupting, but what I'm trying to say is, I get what you're saying here. But for example, that museum, I still have to go. But I saw some reviews, and there'll be some people on YouTube, and they'll be like, "How dare they? There's a picture of Magic Johnson this big, and Martin Luther King is this small on the ground floor. And you know, Mr. Blyden is not even visible on the ground floor. And they've got these soccer players." So that is the insanity that we're trying to discuss. Because that's the uncle you have, who you know who's got the history, but you're all like, yeah, we don't want to be like him. Why is he so mad? And today we're trying to find out how do we stay sane while we both know that that man is not crazy. He is speaking facts when he says there's something going on.
I mean, the thing is like, as the younger generation, and this is back to your shit don't stink thing, you think you got the answers that the older generation doesn't have, you know. But I'll tell you something like my parents can, you know, just continually show me everything I thought that was hip and new, they were doing some variation of that in the 40s and 50s. But where my pop really showed me like how far ahead of, you know, because he got to the point where he could just like snap, analyze something that was very complex going on in the world. I remember when Vibe magazine came out, you know, he just turned to me and said, you know, because I started, you know, I wrote for the first issue, you know, he said, so, yeah, Vibe, right? He said, you think it's gonna really cover the cultures? It's just gonna like ride the wave.
Wow, what did you say?
I said, well, you know, just got a chance to do something. You know, I was always like, thrown back on my, Pop always threw me back on my heels and shit, you know what I mean? Like, you know, like, Yeah, but you know, but what I found was in 5 years, it was like, well, he called that one. You know, it was definitely all about like riding the wave, trying to accumulate as much capital for Time Warner as possible. And by the end of that magazine, it looked more like a consumer report than a magazine that was involved in covering the culture. But Pop just knew, like, he had seen, he had been there before, you know what I mean? And he also had the example of Johnson publication, Ebony magazine, which was in every black household, which did cover the culture, you know, for a good 40 years, you know. It transformed after the founder died, but in terms of what that publication did, you know.
Are we learning enough lessons? I see there's a few questions.
Okay,
but
yeah,
no. But are we learning? Because you're basically saying that your dad saw.
Listen to your elders.
Yeah.
Even if they sound cranky and crazy to you now. Yeah, you know what I mean? Because you're going to be as cranky and crazy as them by the time.
Amen. Amen.
Because you will be dealing with this shit, you know.
But how can what can we learn then? How can we get to a point where we do not not listen to them? That's what I'm trying to say. Like, how do we get to a point where we don't see them as the crazy uncle or the crazy father, or you don't understand?
Well, they're not crazy. You just have to recognize that the trauma that they went through and what they're explaining to you has them very hostile about it. So their way of unpacking the point to you is painful because there's truth to it. The issue is they're opinionating about that truth. And therein lies the problem, because opinions are like assholes. Everybody got one, and most of them fucking stink. When you begin to opinionate, you gotta, again, it's this bell curve thing, right? Yeah, Uncle Charlie is right, but you ain't gotta say that to me. Like, I didn't make that fucking painting that small and Magic Johnson that big. How about the fact that they're both there? That's what's important. Why don't you unpack for me why it's so frustrating to you that the Magic Johnson picture is so big and that one is so small? Is it chronology? Is it your personal experience? Are you dismissing mine?
Or is it just available objects for museum curation?
Or is it just curated by somebody that ain't black anyway and they don't give a shit?
Okay,
Goes on and on and on.
We have some questions here, and then, yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. So, because we're connected via history, and you guys shared your experience when it comes to stamina, from the outside looking in to what's going on here in Holland, do you see any similarities?
Hell yeah. I mean, the Dutch East India Company's a motherfucker. I mean, if we're going to talk about it,
go ahead.
Am I supposed to be PC?
You teach at HPI, you interconnect music and the culture, politics. So
next to the Portuguese, the Dutch were the fucking worst. Without the Dutch, there's no sea rope. There's no long seafaring vessels. You think those motherfuckers was really trading spices in India? Flavors? Trading bodies. Free labor. Surinamese slavery? Literally, work your black ass to death. You get off the boat and literally work until you die. That is why the brown people who are in Suriname now live in the bush, because they got the fuck off the plantation and got in the bush and was able to navigate the bush in times and ways that their oppressor was afraid to attack, and they have survived. So I see oceans of parallels, because the Netherlands is one of those old men that used to be the bullies, but the cash is stacked up so high, he still look young. He got a lot of Botox. But he's still colonizing. Why are we over here arguing about Zwarte Piet in 2019? Why don't you bring up black, and the old Dutch would say, well, don't mess it up for the kids, that's tradition. He's a chimney sweep. Well, why is his fucking suit so red then?
But Rich, your blood pressure is going up at such a speed. Picture yourself being here the full year. And that leads to my next question. Again, that's the stamina. Knowing all this that you're saying, what would your advice be in navigating these spaces? Because in the end, you're a minority. You have to take the chances that you described early in this talk. You have to put in the work. And you have to find a way
You have to pass muster. You have to pass muster. When you bring a debate to a person in power who is arguing that your point is not valid, you have to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that you're right. And when they show resistance, If their resistance is not fact-based and sends you back to your research or back to your experience, that is their opinion. In this context, that's called cognitive dissonance. There's some people in your life that are going to tell you all day, every day that the sky is yellow. You're like, no, it's shades of blue. You're like, no, the sky's yellow.
But I mean,
you're going to spend your life arguing with that person? No.
Thank you.
You get the fuck on.
But
Find somebody that likes blue sky.
Yeah, I mean, look, the reason we're all in this room is because some other black folks organized in disruption of the status quo. You know, they threatened the racial status quo. They threatened the status quo of power, you know, of opportunity, you know what I mean, to where the system looked at the possible damage to its daily working, you know, its daily operation, and said, oh, well, I guess we can't oppress the Negroes in this way because they're organized. And, you know, they've made they've created a means of intimidation, of threat, you know, to the status quo. That where, you know, we have to start throwing money and opportunity in places that didn't exist before. You know, but those are all things people fought and bled for. So, you know, when you talk about like the global impact, you know, of black culture, you know, it's like at the foundation of all those things that people revere about the culture now is blood. You know, as people went out and said, it's like, this cannot go on, this must change. You know, it's like I look at, I'll give you a contemporary example, which is Black Lives Matter has more to do with the black artists that you read about in the paper winning all these different kinds of awards. You know, it's like Pulitzers and Book Awards and blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
What names in Black Lives Matter do you know aside from DeRay McKesson? And is DeRay McKesson Black Lives Matter?
That's an interesting question.
There, like,
Who is Black Lives Matter? Yeah.
There's an answer to that question, but he worked his way into a position to be the faceplate for an organization that he didn't even represent.
Very interesting.
So,
Who's funding it though?
is there ever funding in grassroots organizations?
Well,
yeah.
That's
But
that's
let's-
a
I hear
But let's stick
there's big money behind it though. Who founded the organization?
Well, it's not one. I mean, Black Lives Matter is not
Soros, right?
Soros, yeah.
Yeah, but I'm saying like that's like it's like, I mean, that started out as a hashtag. It was a name for like a broad array collective of people who were doing freedom work all across the country. You know what I mean? So you're also talking about many of the people who are the frontline soldiers are on. You're never going to know their names.
Unheard of.
Yeah, you know.
That's
and
your point you're making.
Yeah, and
Unheard of.
but if you go to Ferguson, which is a like foundational place, it's like they've had 6 activists who were in the front of the coverage, you know, that have been assassinated mysteriously, you know, in the last 2 or 3 years. So that's when you talk about like what actually, you know, constitutes, you know, a mechanism or vehicle for change. It's always like
It's the blood.
Well, it's black collective disruption of the status, it's organized disruption of the status.
And mixed messaging, that whole Soros question. You know, George Soros is a political campaign contributor who's been tied to multimillionaires with shady dealings. They don't want shit to do with Black Lives Matter.
So it's
But
misinformation.
misinformation.
Let's go to Malik. But you had a question.
I actually had a question like 20 minutes ago, and all the questions stack on top of the question, so I'll try to be brief. First a note, the West Indian Company. There was a study done that it's supposed to be the wealthiest corporations that has ever existed. Google it up, huh? As in vaderlandstrots. Talking about disruption, Rich, you mentioned that the Telecommunications Act of 1996, with the big consolidation and the merger movement in the media landscape. I have this question is, let me try to stack it in 2 or 3s. Didn't that consolidation, that Telecommunications Act, in a paradoxical way, create the space for hip-hop culture to, through commercialization process, reach more people. That's one. And two, haven't we seen that whereas musicians and artists, black artists in the 60s, 70s, basically died broke, if we talk about money?
No, not all, no.
No? Okay. And this is, I had the honor to have dinner with Greg a couple of years ago, and I thought I knew stuff about the culture, and he washed my ears, as Andrew said. So
let's get to the
please
two questions.
clarify, but then let me finish the premise. Haven't we seen, in some sense, that there's that there came more space for equity in this geography of cultural production? And the third part is then, could that be viewed as a mode of disruption?
Okay.
The way hip-hop culture is infused and got consumed and as an algorithm transforms capitalism.
3 questions. I'll go 1.5.
Let's do that. Then who else had a question?
Before, let's answer this one, because that's stacked up. To answer your question about whether, did the Telecommunications Act make it such that more people got through and reached more people? Sure. At what cost, though? The cost was the fact that the labels that were putting out the rap records that created the commercial side of hip-hop culture were very sample heavy, for one thing. When the Telecommunications Act happened, it cheapened all of the advertising for the labels, and it put the labels in a position to begin to view the musical landscape in a completely different way. So rather than put another $150,000 into sample clearance for De La Soul, if I can find a kid on YouTube that sells 300,000 units out of the trunk of his car and uses a Triton keyboard with no samples, he's already selling 300,000 units in his neighborhood. Imagine if I put my machine behind him. The problem with that is, that kid's 16. He hasn't lived enough life and had enough musical experience and enough time on the stage and on the mic to have any type of breath control to deliver for you the way the records prior to the Telecommunications Act did. So more people, sure, but at what cost? Now it's Starbucks. Wouldn't you rather go to a cool coffee shop than to go to Starbucks? It's a cost-benefit analysis, right?
Starbucks is cracked.
You're 100% correct in the sense that it did expand the lens, but do we need to see all the bullshit? I like this.
Okay.
You know, as a culturalist, as a living, breathing member of Rocksteady Crew, as a living, breathing Universal Zulu Nation member, that was too expensive of an expense. So you put an addition on the house, it's fucking leaking, it smells like shit. Why I want a house with all that space in it with that bullshit in it?
Great. What do you want to say? And then, because of time, I want to see who else wants to ask a question when we go to that.
Yeah. I mean, I just don't believe the expansion of black opportunity ever comes from above to below. I mean, I think the expansion of opportunity in hip hop that began through the culture itself. You know, through the music. You know, and the sales that started to accrue. That went from like 500,000 units, which was basically the cap for a hit that sold to black people. So when you start moving into platinum, that means other people are listening, and that means that the culture started to penetrate. You know, really the suburbs. You know, it transformed the listening habits of white Americans. Changed the whole notion of a white cultural identity. You know, kind of before you get to, to '96. You know, that transformation. And that's the thing that the music in particular has always done. You know what I mean? Which is that it's changed consciousness. And and not necessarily in a revolutionary way, but just in the way in terms of people's understanding of who black people are in the world and what we're capable of. You know, the NBA did it, before hip hop.
If I may, maybe that's because what Malik is also, it's interesting, he does a lot of stuff and constantly looks at and analyzes institutions and sees how can I change things and how can I start up new institutions. My question to you is, again, in the context of the Netherlands, for example, diversity has been an issue, but it's being neglected for so long on an institutional level. Now it's only taken seriously, for example, at the police now, because there's literally drug lords who are killing lawyers and threatening people. So then all of a sudden, there's this necessity of diversity. You said earlier that most of the change comes through blood. Here's a group of young professionals that have a lot of talent.
I said through disruption.
Disruption, but also blood.
Blood becomes one of the consequences.
Yeah, consequences. Now, how could we get this without all of them dying? How could they influence to decolonize this system? Because I would just find, do you understand what I'm saying, Rich?
And then I'll go to you, and then...
I've been doing a lecture at the Amsterdam Academy for Theater and Dance for the last couple of years, and that has been there and present through all of it. And I said this in front of that class, and I'll say it here. I don't envy the plight of a conscientious young white person in the 21st century.
What do you mean by that? Maybe.
What I mean by that is this culture is a culture outside of white culture by what it is, the people who started it and all that. Young white people come in and are welcomed and actually become very big, very important contributors to the advancement of the culture. I don't envy the fact that when you get finished with us and all this cool shit and all this swag and all of this unpacking of notions, and you go home and your moms don't understand it, and your dad doesn't have a relationship with any black people, and they condemn you and put you in a box to deal with when you leave us. So your sense of belonging is here, but that sense of belonging then gives you a responsibility to consider. Doesn't give you a responsibility explicitly, it gives you a responsibility to consider. And that responsibility is, anytime you hear some MAGA shit, you gotta stop that. Anytime you hear some Sparta Pete was a chimney sweep, you gotta stop that. Anytime your folks in the institutions pass judgment on this culture that you love so much, you have to step to that and stop that with a group of people who believe the same thing you do, because I firmly believe it's gonna be young white men and young white women stepping to the fucking plate. And it's easier said than done. I don't feel sorry for you. I just don't, I couldn't imagine going to a place like this and feeling this good and then going home and feeling sincerely misunderstood or disregarded or dismissed, or to say that this cultural thing that you're tied into doesn't have the magic that you think it has. We know it does, you know it does, and then you gotta force feed that up the ladder now, because until that's done, the system is gonna remain the system, and we're gonna keep having meetings like this until we're all great.
We're about to round up, so I think, Ade, who else wants a question? And anybody else? No? We'll go to you too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, first I would like to commend both, all of you people, but I'm seeing definitely our guests here today, that you are speaking on what I think is definitely the source, the foundation of where you guys are moving from, what it is that made you so passionate, that you help us understand and bring us back to that reality, because we need to hear it. Because a lot of times these days, people are not talking about it as much or really understanding in this modern context of what we live in, this multiculturalism, everything is moving and shaking. But there's a foundation of a struggle. There's a foundation of serious people that shed their blood for us to be in this position that we are. So I'd like to commend you for speaking on that, you know what I'm saying? I think very necessary. In that, I would like to add the question for you.
in this setting of being somebody that's bringing forth an element in this culture for you, it's been more the music, it's been producing, it's been DJing all around the world, having to transition into this commercial world where you are, you know, how you want to be, keep your integrity and manifest the culture and the source that you come from. You have to step into commercial world and spin in an event for a brand or, you know, stuff like that. And for you as well as a writer, you know, being a journalist, wanting to speak on truth, wanting to bring stories that haven't been told that are representing the culture. In that sense, I can see there's also probably been situations where you thought, like, is this story really benefiting the people as a whole? Are we now focusing maybe on something that's destructive within our culture because the big brand, you know, the big multimedia and magazines and stuff have maybe pushed a certain aspect of our genre and our culture, that is the gangsterism and the glorification of all the luxury and the money hungriness. Have there been moments where you felt like, okay, I'm at the crossroads, or I did cross over, or we did have to push something that you saw within your company that happened that was maybe destructive or maybe led to pushing that too much? Or, you know, have you been on these crossroads as well?
Absolutely. You can't move forward in your life without coming across spaces where you have to question your integrity versus your desire to achieve. I think there's a pot of gold at the end of all of this, whether we're talking about commercial rap music or whether we're talking about hip-hop culture. They're two different conversations, but the pot of gold that both of them are aimed at is fame. And we have to ask ourselves, would you rather be famous or well-respected? Praise God, I can sit here in front of you today alongside these gentlemen and say I'm on a stage with two extremely well-respected people because they speak truth to power from sun up to fucking sundown. And if that means you gotta bypass a certain kind of bread, you gotta bypass a certain look, a certain amount of prestige, there's no loyalty over there anyway. So what's the fucking use? And once you get up there, you're just another fucking gingerbread man. And it don't look to me like nobody in here ain't got no gingerbread in their eyes. It feels to me as though we're talking to people who desire to be well respected. Praise God, 2 months from 50 years old, I can say that about a culture that I grew up with. I've been DJing and b-boying and doing graffiti and MCing from 9 years old. It didn't just come around. It didn't just pop up and, hey, I'm gonna do this now. You know? Basketball was that. College was that. All of that shit was an interruption to the person that you're seeing talking today. I'm saying the same shit I was saying at 15, just with more miles on my car, more experience. And over time, it's like fighting. You go to a boxing coach, you lose your flinch mechanism. You're talking shit about fighting and somebody goes like that. And you're like, you're gonna get beat the fuck up. So, we train. You go to the gym, get pushed around by tough guys, literally and figuratively. Creatively, literally, figuratively, learn what it is to eat a clean jab. So we in the Netherlands, go to a kickboxing coach. Get one of your hips kicked into next week one good time. See how much nicer you are to people next week. Think about all the times you got away with popping shit on Facebook and you can't fight.
Amen.
That's how you deal with this shit.
Okay. And then you,
yeah.
I mean, I came from a generation of writers who wrote about hip-hop because it was connected to the work that we were doing in the freedom movement, whether it was around fighting crack in the neighborhoods, whether it was around being in support of the anti-apartheid movement, anti-police brutality. You know, we saw that the music and the energy and the articulation of the culture in that music as being parallel and embedded in the movement, So, it wasn't until Vibe came around that this whole notion of being a hip hop journalist was actually something you could put on your tax report. As your profession, you know what I mean? Because Vibe came in with Time Warner money and
IRS was like, okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, like we were getting junkets, like we were renting cars and 4-star hotels to go out and do stories with, Sade or whoever, what I mean? But in terms, what happened, in terms of the very when the culture transitioned to actually, being one that was like valorized and hustling, as an end unto itself, Then I started writing about that, in an editorial way, and then, just gradually realized, the hip hop I love, like it has pretty much had its day in terms of being the dominant voice, which is the voice of the people deciding, what mattered in the music, So I, transitioned out of commercial journalism into doing books and teaching, what I mean? I got a band of my own, this is our 20th anniversary year, Burnt Sugar. So, when you realize that a certain spaces become toxic, it doesn't represent your values, like, yeah, you do have to engage in like some transition, some reinvention, what I mean? But
Yeah. Can it be saved though? If it became a toxic space, are there elements that can be salvaged?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of people in this room are engaged in the salvaging of the culture because they're not operating from a mercantile instinct. That's not the drive. That's not why anybody's doing this. I mean, like I said earlier, like, I came into just black musicology through jazz. Those musicians like fly all over the world for pennies. You know what I mean? As late great Roy Eldridge said, he said, "There's no red carpet laid out for us when we arrive in Europe to do these gigs. We're in like funky hotels, sometimes playing funky spaces. You know what I mean? So, there's a spiritual devotion, that comes with like really being drawn into, wanting to be a representative of with integrity.
I love the word spiritual devotion.
But I mean, you're not. It's like the thing is, you're not gonna. We know we're not gonna overturn capitalism tomorrow. And the folks who are there, who are in it just for the money, there's gonna be more of them than there are of us. That's just
Well said. You had a question, and then there's Wayne, and then I want to wrap up.
Yeah. So because you guys were on the forefront of taking the functions in the sense of, figuring out what it meant to express yourself as an artist or artistry in the broadest sense of the word, before it traveled, it became an international thing. Are there any advice that you can give regarding to the blind spots that we have, not only as artists, but in a sense of as artists connecting to an institution and artists connecting to the commercialized world? Because I feel in Holland there is a will, there is just not yet a way for it to connect smoothly, if that makes sense. So is there any advice that you can give on both fronts?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's all about maintaining this connection to the grassroots, to the neighborhoods, to your people who are not cultural workers, and kind of building, from that base, and that's going to be where your own kind of, kind of checks and balances come from in terms of the significance of what you're doing, the relevance of it. That's where you're also going to get all your stamina and energy from to keep going forward. You know what I mean? So it's like, if you move into these institutions and you break that connection, you're lost. Yeah.
Maybe I need to be more specific. I don't mean moving into institution, because I do feel that it's very important to stay grassrooted, otherwise it's not relevant. But for example, in Holland, we have a subsidized system. So if you want to do a grassrooted project, there are ways to get it funded. Sometimes there are communication errors from both sides because there's not know-how, like for us as artists, to connect to that, or from institutions to connect to the artist. Once again, you guys being on the forefront of taking those functions and, you know, having dealt with, for example, in the commercialized world, getting a nice opportunity, getting paid, doing the job, and then coming to find out you have no ownership over your own art, for example. Not that that's the case here, but is there just any advice that you can share with us when it comes to that?
Rich, maybe?
Well, I think that you bring up a good point about the subsidy system. In the States, we don't have as robust of a subsidy system. When you say grassroots, for us as Americans, grassroots is fully outside of any systems. It's you and the people around you who are championing you and how you as a unit disseminate your information at a pace that's sustainable, meaning this month we got 20 people and everybody here is vested. Us, the 20 of us, through our different manners of reach outside of this group, have an obligation to recruit, have an obligation to bring on more bodies that speak our language and want to push these agendas forward and help us expand organically further into the community. And this is just, maybe this is just an American ear, but there's a disconnect between a government subsidy trying to attach to groups that are considered grassroots because the grassroots group doesn't have their mission statement together because they're not looking at themselves like they're an organization. They're looking for an organization to help them do what they do more. And I think that that language is wrong.
Okay, that's very, very clear.
Same way on the other side, I think that a government subsidy that's aimed at pulling folks up from a grassroots space, they're shooting blind because they're not scouting grassroots, upstart organizations and groups of people who are making an impact in whatever they're doing, whether it's dance, hip-hop culture, whether it's a group of guys in the Baumer that are talking to 13, 14-year-old boys to keep them from being in the street. That's effective grassroots, community-based effort, right? All your dance classes, whether you're renting a space from an institution out of your own pocket, or whether the institution, you gotta, whatever, however the subsidy works, you're tied to them and you got this amount of window. Once we get there, we have to quadruple our output. Because just putting the key in the door is just putting the key in the door, you know? Getting that relationship in motion is indeed a healthy thing, but once you get in there, you gotta be a fucking bull in a china closet. You gotta be there early, you gotta leave late, you gotta be asking questions, you gotta be sitting on other people's meetings and asking them questions about your shit, because 9 times out of 10, asking them questions about their shit, because 9 times out of 10, that's the only reason somebody with the power to really help you is gonna help.
Amen.
Because they see you putting that, and I see you do, I know you personally, so I see you putting that gusto in. I know how you get down. But that vocabulary has to be fortified with an understanding, I think a deeper understanding of these institutions, and the fact that even though the subsidy is there, it's box checking. They're not our friends. Until somebody inside the organization.
Wayne is gonna ask a question and then I'm gonna wrap it up.
So it's Yvette.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? How often do you see her?
Very quickly, actually I want to touch to that last point because in a way, having worked in the, I work in the belly of the beast. I'm a part of the institution. And in a way, I want to suggest that this system will never change if you are on the outside. So some of us have to be inside the system.
Amen.
For the system to change.
100%.
Otherwise, there is no
round of applause.
Because nobody, we continue talking. One of the things that, and this is where my point comes to. I come from a small country named Jamaica, where unfortunately there, after a long colonial period, there's a whole heap of poor people. And one of the difficulties I have with these kind of discussion is that we expect activism to always be poor. That we expect activists to fight the fight continue to fight the fight, and then we make this distinction between activism and capitalism. That capitalism is whatever, and activism. In the Netherlands, I feel that that is very dangerous, exactly because of the subsidy. Because most of the people who are ZZ payers are, that is freelancers, are people of color. It means therefore that they will constantly be out of the system, not being a part of the money. And the money lies in the system. So if you say you're not going to be in the system, but you're going to continue to be ZZ payer, then it reproduces the idea of black precarity. I think that that's a dangerous thing to do. So my question to you is, how can we move away from this idea that activism, which is conscious, deep activism that wants to change the world, can also earn a little change, earn a little money?
Well, I mean, Marcus Garvey addressed that through economic self-development. Nation of Islam, did the same thing. The Black Panthers did the same thing. And it was also, those movements moved towards electoral politics. I mean, the thing is like, these are multi-pronged attacks. I mean, the thing is like, as an artist, you're a navel gazer on a certain level. You know what I mean? You're constantly concerned with trying to do all the things Rich said you need to do just to maintain your standing and your validity as an artist. Artists are not necessarily known for being great political organizers. You know what I mean? That work has to go on in tandem, with other folks. But I think that, like, if you know the freedom worker, Sojourner Truth, you know what I mean? Like, oh, she definitely had an economic program. You know what I mean? Like, she invented the selfie, and the whole notion of merch. You know what I mean? Like, she sold photographs of herself after her speeches. She said, I sell the shadow to support the substance. You know what I mean? So I don't think that, I think that this idea that activism is essentially like built on a poverty model, it's kind of false given the history. You know what I mean? It's like, but there, there are people that who, in the course of doing, being dedicated to the work, there's this thing called activist burnout. You know what I mean? Where people realize, like, I have expended so much energy towards trying to liberate, the space, liberate my folks. You know what I mean? That haven't been dealing with, what folks now call self-care. You know what I mean? So, that kind of balance can only come from being engaged in collective struggle with folks, and then just having folks that, again, just like, that care about you, being in your space. And the history of the movement is that as well. It's like people, a lot of folks who were part of the Panthers, part of the Black Liberation Army, like, their kids being raised by their parents, you know what I mean? Because folks either went to jail or they went underground or went into exile, you know what I mean? But there was a community that came forth, you know what I mean, and kind of took up the slack. You know what I mean? So, but I think the dangerous thing is thinking that you as an individual are going to be the ones that's, that's going to, come up with the strategies and come up with the vision, to kind of move the needle forward. So, it's always done within a collective framework.
I think as much as we aspire to get next to these institutions, I think that we should put as much energy into seeking mentors who are inside the institution. Individuals, either individuals of color and not individuals of color, that doesn't matter, but a person inside the institution that that can consider these notions a passion project for themselves and it won't interfere with their institutional work. And sometimes that's like finding a needle in a haystack. I mean, we have these ladies are here. This is a fantastic opportunity to create a new space of mentorship and talk to folks who are up in the higher rankings of certain institutions, and then use the exact point you made, which is beautiful. Activism does not have to be poor. It does not have to come from this completely downtrodden, lens. It can come from up high, but sometimes the people who are up high need some inspiration, and we're often very scared to present that. As brave as we are, we get afraid when it's time to actually go to an institution or to a person older than us or more experienced than us and say, yo, this is what's on my mind. This is what I'm trying to do. I see what you're doing. This is what I think you do. Can you unpack the difference between what I think and what you really do? And is there a way that can I shadow you? Can you walk me into these spaces and show me what is it that I'm missing? Because then you're going to take that knowledge back over here to the underground and disseminate that information. And now you're mentoring. Now you're feeding people's brains with information from the top, facts and data from the inside that can help these grassroots things. And who knows, maybe at some point, the person who's mentoring you finds their own activism. And then the combination of those two sends everything over the top. But this is utopia we're talking about, right? Like this is.
And in the meantime, we're here and we're going to be leaving. Before we go, you spoke about people who you do not envy, who go back and should go out and defend the culture. Lately, I've also been reading a lot about, like I said, the historically black colleges, but also Marcus Garvey and even how they had, the black male organizations like Prince Hall and the female fraternities. And it really makes me think about what can we do? Why is it that when we leave this space, often we as black people or people in the culture don't find ways to connect to each other and then wait till the next time around somebody comes or
because we're not connected.
So what could we take home from you two guys based on your experience on how you became better in connecting within the culture or with your brothers and sisters?
Get from between your ears and get in the bush. Don't talk about it, be about it. Get in the bush. That's where the action is. Otherwise, just pontificate.
Thank you so much.
Well, I mean, obviously,
Last word.
yeah, I mean, you form collectives, you form organizations, you kind of give yourselves a reason to come together around collective objectives and goals. You know what I mean? Like
objectives and goals. Like
yeah.
what are they?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's something. Yeah, but I think those are things that you decide. Like Black Rock Coalition, you came together. Okay, what do we want to do other than like say black people play rock and roll? Well, we wanted to completely attack racism within the music industry around that particular idea. The band I put together, Burn Sugar, like we're devoted to this notion of conducted improvisation, right? And so we use a system called conduction that automatically brings everybody together into a unity with one gesture. I'll show you what that is. So if I put my hand out like this in front of a band of 20 people, right? When the baton falls across my hand, you make a sound. Every time my hand falls again, you make another sound, right? Instant unity, check it out. Yeah. So use your voice. I mean, people always want to, I don't, because we don't have mics, like, you know what I mean? It's just stronger. Like the emphasis will be made, all right? So just do it again. Hey! 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 All right? Instant unity.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Give them a round of applause. One more time, thank those two gentlemen for their time. Thank you so much. Let me take a picture with you. And it was a bit. Yeah, that's cool.
Dancers, please stop. I know y'all are fit. I don't want to hear nothing. Still the morning.